2 years ago, I made a video about a language I'd constructed for my fantasy world. An in-world, semi-constructed language called Meendgar. It was received very well, over 500,000 views, a 99% like ratio, dozens of comments asking me to explain more about the language, explain about other languages, explain the politics and lore of this fantasy world. So I did the natural thing. I released one video a couple of months later detailing the events at the beginning of the world several hundreds of millions of years before humans were even around, with no mention of linguistics whatsoever, and then never talked about it again. Talking about my fantasy world, Decratus has become one of the 10,000 videos I've wanted to make, or said I'd make, or started making, but now, as my channel winds down, I feel the need to prioritize. This isn't a I'm quitting YouTube video. I'm not. It's just a video a month has become a video every 2 months, has become a video whenever I find the time and motivation. I'm deep into full-time study at university now, and I still love linguistics. Actually, I probably love it more than ever, but my linguistic needs are met through my education. I'm not brimming with excitement to spurt linguistic facts online all the time anymore. I write them in my Halsarbeiten. But you know what? The language of Archipelagan, spoken from the last century of the Zlatagnan First Age to around 700 Second Age, was the first proper conlang I ever made, and it's just been completely neglected all these years with all the attention I've given Meendgar, and it just wouldn't be fair to my younger self not to give it its own video on this channel. Archipelagan is named after this area here, the Great Archipelago. It's spread along trade routes, particularly at the height of the Killick Porter Lines, which is kind of like a Hanseatic League in the southern part of the Great Archipelago and north of this continent, Bodestro, as well as through the expansion of the territory and influence of the Kingdom of Lurfalal. This era of Archipelagan history is known as the Golden Age, because people were rich, life was pretty good, there were powerful magicians around, and the whole region was thought of as a diverse but fundamentally linked cultural and political area. Because of the importance of the Killick Porter Lines and the power of the Kingdom of Lurfalal, other people around the archipelago adopted it as a second language, making it a lingua franca, a language used by speakers of multiple different first languages to communicate with each other. Thus, learned people and merchants all the way from Durfal in the north to Bambuik in the south could talk to each other in this language. That's not to say that learning this language was easy though. It's got some complicated stuff going on, as we'll see, so the Archipelagan merchants would have loved to have a simple, easy way to learn it available to them at the click of a button. Unfortunately, in Decratus, they don't have phones or apps or websites, but here in the real world, we're lucky to have this video sponsor, Babbel. As a slightly prolific online language person, I've always thought that I should know more Spanish than I do. It's the world's third biggest language. You know, I can read a bit, pick out a few words because of French, but I just haven't had the time to actively learn it and so on. That's what brought me to Babbel, an award-winning app that makes learning a new language simple and effective. And they don't just have Spanish either. With Babbel, you can learn a variety of languages, including Indonesian, Turkish, and French. Babbel courses are created by over 200 language experts. It's like having a private tutor in your pocket. My favourite part about Babbel is that you can listen to podcasts in the language you are trying to learn, which really helped me with my listening skills in Spanish, definitely the part I have most difficulty with. Babbel has over 25 million subscriptions sold and over 1.6 million 5-star App Store ratings. I myself have already learned useful phrases like ¿Dónde está el baño? And me trae la cuenta to start speaking a language in just 3 weeks. Click the link in the description or go to babbel.com/Klein and you'll get up to 55% off your subscription. That's up to 55% off your subscription when you use my link. Join the millions of Babbel learners breaking the language barrier every day at babbel.com/Klein. Thank you to Babbel for sponsoring this video. Though there are many Archipelagan dialects, and there's also a whole history of the language, so at the end of this time period, there are big differences, and eventually they all develop into different languages. We're going to be focusing on this dialect here, in the Kingdom of Lurfalal, specifically in its capital, Zollbara, specifically in the 7th century. Lurfalal, by the way, is not the Archipelagan name. That's the name for the island in the native Soinehin language. In Archipelagan, this place is called Malakrar, and Zollbara is called Zollbara. A dialect continuum is a geographical spectrum of language. In the real world, you could point to Arabic or arguably the Scandinavian languages, where there isn't a hard border like between German and French where you cross over and a new language is spoken, but rather a slow transition between related dialects. This often leads to people at either end of this space having a very hard time understanding each other, whilst at every given step along the way, people can understand each other. Exactly this is the case for Archipelagan, though there is a more unified written language in the Larak alphabet, which originally looked like like this when it was carved into stone tablets, but by the time of Archipelagan, parchment sees widespread use and a more handwriting-friendly version of this script has emerged. Though the runic version is still used as a print script. The script has some irregularities which I've represented as best as I can in the romanisation as well, like with this L with a cedilla being used when a R sound is written as the L letter in the Archipelagan script. These are the consonants of Archipelagan, or Yekkachoyer right here. Please, excuse my pronunciation, it's not very good. But at any rate, this is a pretty nice, neat consonant inventory, and it forms the base letters of our script, which are then modified with these diacritics in order to show what vowel comes after it. Since these vowel markings don't have the same status as consonants, but unlike in something like Hebrew, they're compulsory, this script could be termed an abugida. But, oh, what's this? This is a strange assortment of vowels to have in a language. There's a vowel that's very conspicuously missing here. That is U. See, most languages have a U vowel. The most basic three-vowel system is typically A-I-U, A-I-U, like in Arabic. And this looks like a five-vowel system, typically A-I-U-E-O, like in Spanish, with a piece missing. This does happen in natural languages. Navajo, for instance, has this set of vowels, kind of, but it's very rare. Then you get to the non-basic vowels. These two diphthongs are pretty normal, but why is the A diphthong written with the base of the A letter? And why do A, O, and I have long vowels, but E doesn't? And that's what this video is about now. It's my attempt to backwards construct a reason for how this vowel system my 13-year-old self came up with could possibly have emerged. I mean, this is the most widely accepted hypothesis that the linguists of the world of Descartes have come up with. But first, let's take a quick look at Archipelagan morphology. Archipelagan is broadly an agglutinative language. That means morphemes are glued together into big long words with clear boundaries for what each bit means, like in Turkish. For verbs, this is overall pretty neat as long as you ignore tense, which we'll not be covering today, with only 4 declension classes, no exceptions, and this set order in which the word is built. However, nouns are more complicated. Declensions for number and definiteness have allomorphs depending on the declension class, that is, different forms of the same morpheme. Archipelagan actually has 12 groups of nouns, complete with A's and B's, and when you take a look at these, you realise that there's a bit of vowel gradation, there's vowel changes in the stem of the word, like yekkach, archipelago, becoming yekkeche in the plural. Some syncretism, that's where a word can look the same in 2 different forms, like palm, meaning both the plural coins and the definite form the coin. And even some subtractive morphemes, like the plural of Nijar language being Nijar. You also see a good bit of fusional morphology. In many of these groups, you can't really disentangle what phonological string is telling you that the word is plural, and which is saying that it's definite. But the case morphology is definitely added on in an agglutinative manner after this information, with a clear separation. Oh yes, the case morphology. Don't worry though, Archipelagan only has 2 cases and nouns, the nominative and the partitive. Just like English, Archipelagan is descended from a language that made a lot of case distinctions but has simplified its system greatly. In the case of Archipelagan, its ancestor language, Larak, had 6 cases: nominative, accusative, dative, locative, partitive, and genitive. Nominative, accusative, dative, and locative have all collapsed into a single case, now called simply the nominative, which is the more common case by far. So you get a sentence like, the girl gives the rice to the boy, yalle ribinef semmef palioch, and what role the girl, the rice, and the boy play in the sentence is indicated entirely by word order, which is generally VSO. The verb, then the subject, then the direct object, then the indirect object if there is one. The case of all these words is the same. The partitive and the genitive merged into the partitive, which is used for possessors, as a genitive would be, so Rebenefe Rommog is the girl's pillow, but it's also used with quantifiers, like in Karakayak, many people, and with numbers greater than 3, so you would count Sorkayo, Vaikai, Rakai, Zevkayak. But just like English, Archipelagan maintains a subject-object distinction in pronouns, so they have a bonus accusative case just for themselves. Well, actually, unfortunately, the pronoun cases don't line up perfectly with the noun cases, because there the Ladak cases have merged like this instead, but that's something for another time, perhaps. I don't want to leave you in suspense for too long. After all, you're all on the edge of your seats just waiting to hear about that vowel system. If we look at the verbs, we see something very interesting that can give us a little clue as to what's happened here. All these first-person forms trigger something called front gradation, where a preceding short A in the stem transforms into an E. So from the verb fanap, I say is not nappi, but rather neppi. For the mi verbs, the first and third person endings are the same, both e, so we get a contrast here between chette, I want, with front gradation, and chatte, he/she wants, without front gradation. So is this to do with first person? Well, in the nouns we also see this form of gradation, and here it looks like it has something to do with the vowel. If you look at group 3, for instance, you see that the e ending of the plural indefinite triggers it, but the og ending of the plural definite doesn't, yielding yakeche, yakachog. But these e's don't cause it. So what's going on here? Also, the countable nouns have 3 more types of gradation and are roughly organised in order of what type of gradation they have. Palatal in group 1, depalatal in groups 2 and 3, long in groups 4 to 6, well, originally 4 to 7, but group 7 has lost this. Then the rest of the classes have no vowel gradation, except sometimes our old friend front gradation pops up randomly before some e endings. The thing is, if we understand this gradation system, we can understand how Archipelagan got its strange system of vowels. So, it is believed that Proto-Larraketic had a 5-vowel system, A, E, I, O, U, pretty standard stuff. Then, going into Archipelagan's ancestor, Larrak, something very strange happened. Namely, we got a merge into a vertical system. What this means is that I and E merge into I, and O and U merge into O. If these two merge and these two merge, we're left with a set of vowels fundamentally differentiated by only one dimension, thus a vertical system. This does exist in real life, like in the Shapsug dialect of Adyghe in Turkey, but these vowels all have a bunch of different realisations based on the surrounding consonants. It's just that the phonemes are vertical. So I imagine a similar thing going on in early Larrak, with I having E-like realisations and O having U-like realisations in certain circumstances. But the system has fused to the point where, in the classical Larrak period, the grammarians described their language as having 3 vowels. At this time, the writing system also gets invented, with vowel markings almost entirely restricted to extremely specialised writing and to some names. This means that the religious book, this Litagne, was written without diacritics, and the Archipelagan speakers in the Kingdom of Lurfalal are still Litagnans, so important religious concepts or words taken from the Holy Book tend to be written without diacritics in Archipelagan as well. In Middle Larrak, though, some important changes take place. Firstly, the phoneme h disappears. At the beginning of words, this becomes h, which is preserved in Archipelagan. In some other words, it disappeared altogether, but under certain circumstances, for instance, if it fell between a vowel and a consonant, it softened to the palatal approximant y, like in vochla, door, becoming voila. Phonemically, these sequences could be analysed like this, I, oi, and e, but phonetically, Middle Larrak basically got 2 diphthongs, I and oi, and, well, e isn't a diphthong, it's just a long I. This is where we get our palatal gradation from. The word kabo ultimately descends from the classical Larrak kapo, which had a plural ending hno. Kapohno, however, became kapoino, thereof the Archipelagan kaboi. There were already certain morphological endings causing a doubling of the final consonant in the stem, like the classical Larrak sapichin, which had a plural form sapichinnet. Sequences vowel plus h plus I all fell together into a single syllable nucleus, so sopichin became sopine. The plural suffix it should have caused this to become sopinit, but at this stage, Larrak had an aversion to super heavy syllables in the middle of words, so part of this nucleus was deleted. This caused the depalatal gradation present in the Archipelagan sobine, sobinne. But those 2 words bring up another important change. Under certain circumstances, single consonants between 2 vowels, usually if the preceding syllable is stressed, became voiced, so a p would become a b. This is called intervocalic voicing, and it's a fairly common process. It happens, for instance, in Japanese. But why is this important for vowels? See, up until this point, Larrak has not distinguished long and short vowels. Arguably I and E, yes, but phonemically that's likely better analysed as I plus y. However, phonetically it has had them. In the north of England, the usual pronunciation for these 2 words is mat and mad, with a short a in both cases. However, in general, the a in mad is actually a little bit longer than the a in mat. People don't think about it, but in most languages, vowels before voiceless consonants are shorter than before voiced ones, even vowels that phonemically have the same length value. There are many theories as to why this is, but in the south of England, the usual pronunciations of these words is mat and mad with a long A. The long A here isn't a new phoneme or anything, but the natural difference between the vowel length in mat and mad has been exaggerated to become a conscious part of speech. This is exactly what had already happened in stressed syllables preceding voiced consonants in Larak. But just like in English, this doesn't really matter, it's just situational. But now imagine that English went through a phase where all the final consonants got devoiced. You know, like its cousin, German. Then, in southern British English, what would be left over would be mat and mat. And suddenly the contrast between these words isn't in the final consonant anymore, but in the vowel length. This is what happened in reverse in Larak. When plosive consonants between two vowels were voiced, if they followed a stressed syllable, minimal pairs were created that were distinguished only by vowel length. Classical Larak capo and cabo became capo, and cabo became Middle Larak cabo and cabo. Around this time, writing with diacritics became increasingly normal, and special diacritics for vowel length came into use, and a diacritic form of the letter that used to represent h came to be used for diphthongs and long I. In some writing from this period, a distinction seems to have been made between long e sounds that originate from a sequence y and those that originate from the intervocalic voicing debacle, but the second method falls out of fashion, and thus e comes to be written as analogous to oi and I. Right. I, that diphthong that doesn't exist in Archipelagan. That would be because of late Larak, an outstanding feature of which is I mutation. This is a form of regressive vowel harmony which I'll take this moment to shout out a small creator here who made a pretty good video covering the topic, but essentially this is Germanic umlaut, where vowels get fronted because there's an I or E following them, typically in the next syllable, in order to harmonise with that front vowel. Late Larak I mutation is very limited in scope though, only affecting short A, with some bonus rules that I won't go into here. In the circumstances where I mutation did trigger, A became fronted to E. Thus, the diphthong I began to be realised as A, and loads of short A's in words were transformed into E's, especially towards the end of words. This vowel harmony could sometimes trigger multiple times in a word, like the name Patari becoming Peteri. So now we know where our front gradation comes from in those first person forms. It's vowel harmony from the I ending, or the E ending? I mean, that makes sense with the Peteri example, but why is there then no front gradation with all of these E's? To answer that, we need to look at early Archipelagan. The end of late Western Larak and start of early Archipelagan is generally considered to be around 100 FA, when those on the western coast of Laraken became increasingly influenced by their trade with the Geroe people, with their Geroe language. This was a Laraketic language which had maintained the Proto-Laraketic 5-vowel system, and a significant number of loan words entered early Archipelagan from Geroe. A lot of these words had, of course, U and E, but the different treatment of these is very interesting. Geroe U in words like kunnal became O in Archipelagan, but Geroe E became E. This suggests that early Archipelagan no longer had U at all, making it a true gap in the vowel space, as it is in Navajo, whilst since they had E as an allophone of A, they were okay with using it for loanwords. Though this led to only a very small number of minimal pairs, if any. The fact that they didn't hear E and reanalyze this as A means that E could already have been considered a phoneme. This is when people started writing it with this diacritic, probably just because it was the combination of symbols left over in the already existing orthography, and writing from the time suggests that the distinction between umlauted A's and loanword E's began to get blurred, suggesting that the late Larak vowel harmony was probably already lexicalized by this stage. The second key development that marks the transition into early Archipelagan is the enormous simplification of the ends of words. This might have been because of early Archipelagan's extremely strong stress accent, which usually fell towards the beginning of words, making final syllables quieter, leading to the loss of some or parts of some of them. This is a theory, by the way, as to why word final case morphology was largely lost in languages like English and German. It was a messy process, with few concrete rules, but there are some general trends that can be pointed out. Open syllables, especially those ending in an O vowel, were often deleted, leading to the weird morphology of group 8 nouns. Nijar used to have a plural nijaro, and even though it was a shorter word, because nijar ended in a closed syllable, it was unaffected, whilst nijaro had its ro deleted, creating a paradigm where, synchronically, plurals are formed by deleting a part of the stem. The definite marker F has just followed along here and slotted onto the new plural indefinite. That's a common theme with a lot of these. Whilst A and I were also occasionally deleted, they were more often reduced, importantly both centralized, turning them both into an E-like vowel. Now, you can tell what used to be an A and what used to be an I by whether or not it causes front gradation. This is the difference between group 2A and 2B. Although they are declined in largely the same way, a word like kan has a plural kanne because its plural used to be kanna, whereas botap has a plural boteppe because its plural used to be boteppi. This is also where you get your chatte versus chette minimal pair from earlier. As we can see when we compare them with the other forms, the typical pattern is IOA for first, second, and third person, so it makes sense that the me verb conjugation was also once IOA. A-type ra verbs and da verbs have long vowel endings, so they were unaffected, whilst B-type ra verbs and fa verbs were protected from this by having an extra open syllable after them which was deleted instead. Apart from in the case of the fa verb second person for some reason, which got away with a simple A to E vowel reduction. Some vowel reduction also took place in non-final positions, most prominently to the vowel and the partitive endings, which are, and that's the third key development that marks early archipelagan, rapidly becoming the only case morphology the language has left. They were always ah to begin with, but became e's. The final simplification was the deletion of final consonants, particularly one of a pair of doubled consonants, meaning very few root nouns in archipelagan end in a double consonant, making up the relatively small sets of words in declension groups 9 and 12. But as the consonant shortened, the vowel of many words actually lengthened, maintaining the syllable weight. This increased the prevalence of long vowels and resulted in the pattern of long gradation, as in tai to tai, completing our exploration of the vowel system. Then the people of West Laraken grew in power and started colonizing parts of the Rahak, including the Gerawe people, converting them to the Zlatakan religion. Through political maneuvering and bribery and trade and all that stuff, they began to have significant presence in Zollbara, in the court of Diameton II, and managed to convince the king of Zollbar to convert to Zlatanism. Diameton and his courtiers began to use archipelagan, perhaps to distinguish themselves from his subjects, and with the support of West Laraken, he conquered the rest of Lafalal, becoming its first king. In the generations that followed, archipelagan saw its use increasing, especially in the south around the capital, and Lafalal became the dominant power of the Rahak, conquering other islands and spreading Zlatanism, long-distance boat travel, and of course, the strange archipelagan four-vowel system. The particle le has nothing to do with the Chinese le. The reason I didn't want to talk about it is because I haven't found anything analogous in real languages, and though Mayankar is a constructed language, so if I can imagine it, then so can Azoro Undu. As the language becomes more spoken and gains native speakers, I wonder if they would filter out such a particle or change its meaning in line with more natural language use. I'm pretty sure that the use of it to avoid the subordinate would be widespread in spoken language. That makes sense to me, with a phrase like Ules do pundum geppet le wainrar. The dogs eat meat, I know, serving as a replacement for pundun oles de geppete wainrar, which would be a more formal or literary form. The le here groups together the words before it into a single idea, but in a more formal linguistic sense it could be called a complementizer, analogous to the that in the English version of this sentence. But the other uses it has, stuff like riborigoddot luwe urbrar, with lu being a contraction of le and u, as opposed to riborigoddot uwe urbrar. I'm not sure. The first here would be the rice and the beans that I cooked, whereas the second would be the rice and the beans that I cooked, with le once again grouping the words before it into a single idea. Do any of you know any languages that do this? I don't know, maybe it's fine.